So today we're going to talk about some formal qualifications. Yes, sir?
Are we going to keep watching the History Channel documentary?
Yes, we're going to watch it in small segments, though. So maybe today, maybe next class. So today we're going to talk about some formal qualifications. What does the Constitution say about president? Who can be president? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we begin with, got to be a natural-born citizen. So those of you that were not born in the United States or not born to American parents, I'm sorry, you cannot be president. At least at this point until the Constitution changes. You can become a senator. You can become a member of the House of Representatives. You could even be Speaker of the House, I think. Somebody brought this up yesterday at lunch. Would we appoint a Speaker of the House who does not have the presidential qualifications? I don't know. To me, it would not make sense because they're third in line to the presidency, but as far as I know, there's nothing saying that we couldn't. We might just skip over them in the line of succession. So, you have to be a natural-born citizen, which means that either you were born on American soil or your parents were American citizens when you were born, even if you were born outside the United States somewhere. You must be 35. So again, remember that I said that we were going to stair-step this from 25, which is the requirement to serve in what position? 25-year-olds can be House Representatives. 30-year-olds can be Senate, which is the upper house. And now we go 35, which is the presidency. Those are the age requirements of the Constitution. You also have to be a resident of the United States for at least 14 years. You have that. Well done. But do you have this one? Unfortunately, not yet. Not quite there yet. So, those are the three qualifications there to become president. Now, this one was actually exempted for a few of our presidents. Why? Number one. Yeah, many of our first presidents were not even, didn't have the opportunity. The United States didn't exist when they were born. So we did exempt them. The first president to be born in the United States. Jeopardy trivia here. Who was it? Without Googling it.
John Adams.
No.
Donald Trump.
Who is the first president born in the United States?
Abraham Lincoln.
No, it was before Lincoln.
George Washington.
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson's close, but no, he was not born in the United States. No. Martin Van Buren is correct. Yes, president number 8. So someday, when or if you're on Jeopardy and you get that question right, I expect a cut.
I'll use my lifeline.
There you go.
Two-term presidents.
Now, if you are a two-term president, you are disqualified from running again. Correct. 22nd Amendment is the foundation for this elimination. This was not originally in the Constitution, but now has been added. So you cannot go back and run after 2 terms. Now, that does not mean 2 consecutive. We know that Grover Cleveland served 2 terms, but they were non-consecutive. Most other presidents that have served, well, all other presidents that have served 2 terms have been consecutive. So we can't get another George W. Bush. We cannot get another Jimmy Carter era. We cannot get another Barack Obama. So those guys have all served their time. They're not allowed to do that again. By the way, who is thinking of our age qualifications, who is the youngest president to...
Ronald Reagan.
I heard it, but somebody said Roosevelt.
I did.
Yeah, Roosevelt was the youngest to ever become president at the age of 42. Youngest elected was... No?
No.
Thank you for participating.
Bernie Sanders.
Yes. Oh my God. Youngest president ever elected was John F. Kennedy. He was age 43 when he was elected. So we have not had anybody serve in their 30s. That could change, but up to this point. And our oldest president,
Trump.
It is Donald Trump. Yeah.
Is it really?
Mm-hmm. Now, at the age of election, now Ronald Reagan served. I forget how old he was when he left office, but Donald Trump is the oldest to be elected. I think Reagan was 69 and Trump was 70 or 71 when he got elected. So that is, history was made last year. When it comes to the term or the time you get in office, there were a number of original ideas that did not pass. Many people wanted them to have a 6-year term, believing that a 6-year term would be sufficient to get a lot accomplished in government, but it would be a 1 term. You could not serve more than 6 years. Others favored a 4-year term with a chance of re-election, which ultimately is where they decided to go for this. And George Washington set the precedent for all other presidents when he decided to step down after his 2nd term in office. And up until we get to the 1930s and early 40s, nobody ever challenged that. Every other president decided that they were going to step down after 2 terms to follow George Washington's pattern. Franklin Roosevelt broke that mold. Why? Why did he decide to serve more than 2 terms? Why do you think? What was going on? Samuel?
Oh, they were amidst the coming of World War II, so that drastic change probably would not be good.
Okay. Yes, the loom of World War II was one of those things. There was another reason besides World War II. They were just coming out of the Great Depression. Things were starting to get better. Many of FDR's policies were either in place or were going through struggles in the Supreme Court. He wanted to see those through. And he looked around at the landscape and really did not believe there was anybody else capable of taking over and doing as good of a job as what he did. Now, FDR was not necessarily the most humble man in the world, but he was an effective leader. So he decided to push that for a 3rd term. The American people could have said no. They could have chosen not to vote for him. But the election was not really that close. Now, after Franklin Roosevelt serves, he actually gets elected 4 times. He serves 3 full terms and then part of a 4th before he dies. Congress decides to pass the 22nd Amendment. And of course, we've already studied the amendments, so we know that 22nd Amendment talks about 2-term limits for the presidency. And in that, you are allowed to serve 2 full terms, plus you may serve a partial term if it is under the 2-year mark. So what is the maximum number of years that a person could serve? 10. It is, 1 day less than 10 years. Yeah, so if you are at that exact 50% mark, then you couldn't serve that many. So 1 day less than 10 years is the maximum anybody can serve. Now, nobody has done that up to this point. President Johnson had that opportunity, but he decided not to run for re-election. He decided to go off into retirement. So he did not do that. Now, when you become president, let me be clear here. This is the real president, not our government campaign that we are doing. There is no pay and benefits for you should you win. Now, actually, there is a benefit. You get to exempt your test. But the congressional role in all of this is that Congress gets to decide how much the president makes. And they get to decide what benefits he gets. Anytime that the president's salary and benefits are changed, it has to take place, just like for Congress, it has to take place at the start of the new presidency. You can't change that during the middle of a president's term. Why? Why is that an important provision in there that they can't change the president's pay in the middle of his term?
Because he does the same thing every day. It would make sense for him to get a raise.
That's true, but there's a better reason. Think more government-minded. Okay, could take advantage of it. So if you've got a Congress that wants a president to sign a bill into law, and they say, we'll give you a $500,000 raise next week if you sign this into law, there's some ethical problems there. So they want to make sure that everybody is working accordingly. So Congress has the ability to decide that. He gets paid $400,000 annually. plus benefits. Now, some of our presidents have looked at that salary and they go, I'm going to donate it to charity. I don't even need that. In fact, Donald Trump was one of them. I don't know what he has done with his salary, but he had talked about that he really didn't need the money. He was considering donating that somewhere. I don't know whether he really has or not. Really? Okay. I do know that you can't refuse a salary. You have to take the salary, but you could defer it. You could donate it somewhere else. Yeah, no kidding. That'd be nice to be in that type of position, wouldn't it?
What is
Exactly. Yeah. So the original salary for George Washington was $25,000, which back in the 1700s is a pretty decent salary. $400,000 today is higher than the average American makes, but is nowhere near the stress and the work involved of what he should be paid. But he also gets certain benefits like Camp David, which is the president's vacation home. He gets Air Force One. He also has a full staff at his disposal at any time he needs it.
Plus he gets to go visit.
So with this, all of his living expenses are provided for him. Now, he gets a $50,000 expense account. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? If you had a credit card with $50,000 on it every year to buy whatever you needed to run your job or to work, operate in school, it'd be great. But he gets $50,000 for his expense account. And as long as he can justify that for his role as president, he can spend that on about whatever he wants. So he can go buy a new suit. He can buy new sunglasses if he needs it. Now, he doesn't go out and buy those things himself. He sends people out to do that. He doesn't have time to go shopping for those things. But even the things that he gets in the White House, so the president's hungry at midnight and he wants a bowl of Reese's Puffs. He calls down to the kitchen. They tally all of that and they charge him every time that he orders something out of the kitchen. If he wants a cheeseburger, that's fine. You can get it at 3 a.m. if you want a cheeseburger, or if you you need those fried pickles at 12:01. Oh, so good. If you need some homemade fried pickles, they will make it for you. You just get on the phone, you order it. But you are going to have to pay that out of that expense account. So, or that comes out of your salary, I believe. So the president has a lot at his disposal, but he also still has to pay his bills just like you and I do. Once you retire, you also get a nice pension, retirement account. You get Secret Service protection. I think it's for 10 years. So you have a pretty good retirement plan as well. Now let's talk through succession here. So in Article 2 of the Constitution, they did have a plan if the president was unable to fill his role or if he left office, the powers would then transfer to the vice president. Some people question whether or not that was actually going to transfer his powers or the vice president was just a temporary fill-in. Question?
So I know you're going to go into like the whole disability or like assassination, but is it like even an option for a president to resign midterm or, like, without the threat of impeachment? Like just decide I don't want to do this anymore.
Absolutely. At any point, he can go ahead and do that. All he has to do is just go to his cabinet and go to the Speaker of the House and just say, I'm done. Offers letter of resignation. So then the succession line would kick in. And according to the 22nd Amendment, the vice president would take over. The vice president would have the opportunity then to pick his own vice president when he took over as president. So that's what happened with Gerald Ford. The Speaker of the House does not automatically move up. It's not like everybody moves up one slot. Do you have a question, Jake?
So you said they still get Secret Service protection 10 years after?
I believe it's 10 years. It may be for life of the president. Maybe it's 10 years for the wife. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yes, you do get Secret Service protection. So, in fact, one of my my friends, I think I've told you about, his goal was to guard the president one day. He told us that his chances were a whole lot better in guarding one of the family members of the president because those spots are much easier to fill. They don't put as high-profile people in there. So I don't know. I kind of lost touch with him. I don't know whether he ever made it or not. But if any of you watched Game 5 of the World Series, it was a pretty great moment where they brought out George Bush 41. He brought out the game ball, and he's in really bad condition right now. He's in a wheelchair and can't really talk a whole lot or move very well. They brought him out holding the game ball, wheeled him out there by the first base line, and then Bush 43 comes out, and they hand off the ball from 41 to 43. He takes the ball to the pitcher's mound, he turns around, and he just fires that thing at the catcher. I mean, he didn't even hesitate. It was just one of those, like, walk up to the pitcher's mound, turn around, fire it right back. He still got a gun on him a little bit there. George Bush 41 played for Yale and had an opportunity to play minor league baseball, or I think one of the major league teams wanted to sign him, but he ended up going into a different business instead. So he's a pretty good baseball player back in his day. So they're big Astros fans. I would assume that they're going to be watching tonight, Game 7. If any of you are following that series, it's been a pretty intense series. So, yes, that is true. If you see, now I'm okay with you announcing that, but I'm a little sad because the people that have no idea what the World Series is about, have not been paying attention, would have missed out on that had we not announced that. But,
I was watching it on my phone.
No,
everyone paid
Yeah.
attention as soon as someone said free talk.
I know. It's too bad some of you that work in the aftercare program couldn't take the bus down there and take all the kids through, and they're probably not gonna eat them, but you're gonna get a whole basket full of tacos. That's what we do with our kids. They don't like those tacos, so my wife and I eat them. So, according to the 25th Amendment here, 25th Amendment deals with presidential succession. And this was adopted in 1967. If the president leaves office before his term expires, the vice president officially becomes president with all of the powers involved. This clarifies any sort of question mark as to whether this is a temporary fix or whether it's permanent. And 25th Amendment says it's going to be a permanent one. Then Congress now has the power to decide what the order of succession is after this step. So Congress has decided the order of succession is going to go in line of the Speaker of the House, then the President Pro Tem, and then we'll go through all the cabinet positions in the order in which they're created. But after the Vice President takes over as President, he leaves a vacancy in his seat as the Vice President. So he has the power and the ability to choose his own Vice President. He could choose his next door neighbor if he wanted to. He could choose his grandmother. What? He could. Now, the guy would have to, or the girl, would have to fulfill the constitutional requirements. 35 years old, 14-year resident, natural-born citizen. As long as they filled those things, he could. Now, chance of getting that past the Senate is pretty slim. The new vice president does have to have Senate approval in order to actually take that office. So if that were to happen, he were to nominate somebody that is not a good candidate, Senate's going to say no, and they're going to have to go back to square one. So, new vice president, and then the 25th Amendment also deals with disability. This was a question mark with President Roosevelt that actually goes back to President Wilson. Woodrow Wilson had a stroke in the last 2 years of his presidency that almost made him unfit for the position. In fact, some historians have argued that he was not himself and really was not mentally capable of holding the position his last 2 years. And that it was Edith Wilson, the First Lady, that actually ran the government for the last 2 years of his presidency. She was very protective of him after his stroke. He almost died trying to get the Treaty of Paris ratified. But anyway, so we get here and they start talking about, okay, how do we deal with this? If a president has a major health issue and we deem him unfit for the presidency, 25th Amendment clarifies that. If the problem is temporarily, or if the president is temporarily or permanently disabled, this will kick in. The Speaker of the House and the President pro temp have the ability to pass that power on to the Vice President. So there are two cases here that can be enacted. You can have voluntary disability, where the President realizes in and of himself, I cannot do my position, I cannot fulfill my role, I am going to voluntarily give up my powers to the Vice President. So he goes to the President pro temp, he goes to the Speaker of the House, he tells them this, I'm going to pass on my powers. Now, up to this point, that has only been on a temporary basis. Ronald Reagan had to do this at one point. George W. had to do this in 2002 during a surgical procedure that he was going through, and there was some questions to whether he would come through okay, and while he was in surgery, he was going to be totally knocked out, and so he needed Dick Cheney to be able to run the government. So that's voluntary. If you are incapacitated, meaning that you cannot make that decision yourself, then there is a provision here where they can go through a process of declaring you unfit. If he fails or refuses to relinquish power, the Vice President, along with a majority of the cabinet members, may send a written statement to the Speaker of the House and the President pro temp giving their reasons why they don't believe the President is fit for office any longer. So you almost have to have a military, or have to have a governmental coup in order for this to happen without there being some legitimacy to it. But that is theoretically possible. If you got the Vice President and half the cabinet members, plus the Speaker and the President pro temp, all on board with it, you could declare the President unfit for his job. And they could vote him out. And they could enact the 25th Amendment. That is something that seems like a movie script is made for, right there. Conspiracy in the White House or something like that. Now, they can do this in order to make it permanent. Congress has to meet within the first 48 hours of this letter being sent to the Speaker. Congress will meet, and you have to have 2/3 of all of Congress vote the President unfit for his job. So you can't just have one party decide this. It's going to have to be bipartisan. Everybody's going to have to be involved in that. So you need 2/3 of all of Congress to determine his inability. I'd make sure to include that in your notes. So once we get past the Vice President, Congress has the ability to determine what the order of succession is. And they have said that they're going to go based off of the order in which the positions were created in the presidential cabinet. So we have the President first, then there's the Vice President, then there's the Speaker of the House, and President pro temp. Those are the ones that we've already talked about. You should know the first 4 already at this point. In some years, we have gone through and we have learned every cabinet member and who they are. We're not going to do that this year. However, we should be familiar with the order of succession. I'm not going to have you write it out in a list. However, I may ask you a question such as, following the President pro temp, who would be the next person in line for the presidency? You need to be aware of who the next cabinet position is. And the winner is Secretary of State. That was the first one created. Max? We'll get to that here in a minute. Yes, he is down the list a long ways. Yeah. So we have the Secretary of State. That used to be a really, really important position. Early days in our government, the guy who was Secretary of State often used that as a launch pad to become a candidate for presidency. Not quite as much anymore.
So if something were to happen to the Vice President, would the Speaker of the House then move up to Vice President?
No, this does not work like a automatic we move up the ladder type of thing. So the Vice President moves up, creates a hole right here, and the new president gets to choose his own Vice President. So these guys all stay in the same order. They never really move up. Unless somebody gets fired and they hire them into a new position, which sometimes happens. Number 7 is Secretary of Defense. By the way, Secretary of State deals with a lot of foreign affairs issues. Secretary of Treasury deals with a lot of our economy, our money. Defense, obviously our military there. So you're going to want to have somebody that is capable of handling those type of decisions. We also have our Attorney General, who is going to help us in legal issues. He's number 8 on that list. And by the way, just as a side note, the qualifications for these are non-existent. So there's no age requirement, there is no citizenship requirement, there is no residency requirement for these positions. The president can pick anybody he wants. Now, when it comes to the order of succession, if one of these people does not fulfill those 3 requirements to become president, then that person will be skipped over. We had that a few years ago where may even have somebody in there now who's not an American or was not a natural-born American citizen. They got their citizenship later in life, so they would not qualify to be president. So we just skip over them in the order of succession. Number 9 is Secretary of Interior. This is not the person that decorates the White House. This is the person that takes care of our natural resources and our national parks. Secretary of Agriculture. That one should be pretty self-explanatory. My former governor is Secretary of Agriculture right now, Sonny Perdue. Commerce. Commerce is dealing with trade, both internally in the United States and external exports. Secretary of Labor. They're going to be dealing with a lot of the labor unions and businesses, dealing with minimum wage laws. Health and Human Services, this is the one that comes from Designated Survivor. No, I'm sorry.
No.
It was 14. Housing and Urban Development, I believe, was his position. Am I correct on that? Yeah, so he was 14 on this list. And I'm going to explain how that works and relate that to the show in a moment.
So, like when they do that speech that he does to Congress,
Mhm.
is a different person in the line every time they hide?
Yes. Yeah. So Health and Human Services is going to deal with a lot of our medical care system, housing and urban development, dealing with building projects, government, housing. They're going to deal with foreclosures, home safety, home inspections, those type of things. Number 15, dealing with transportation, pretty self-explanatory in that one. Energy, number 16. I have a few left. I think there's 3. Secretary of Education. I always thought that would be a cool job, except for you're number 17 in line for the presidency. Chances of, yeah, that seems like you're way down the table.
That would happen is if like that actually became like a possibility. Like, you actually had to become president.
Yeah, that would be. We have the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. That position has gotten a lot of heat recently. People are not happy with the way that that's been handled, both in the Obama and Trump presidencies. And then the Homeland Security. My second year teaching, we had a whole bunch of black vehicles pull onto our campus one afternoon, all labeled Homeland Security. And it was like, it looked like a presidential motorcade. I don't have a clue who was in those vehicles. I still to this day don't know exactly what all was going on, but I do know that they were investigating something pretty serious in our neighborhood around our school. And there was apparently some online activity was going on that was doing something that was a threat. And so they had to come in, they confiscated all of our school's computer servers to find out. They believed that somebody hacked into our wireless network in order to be able to download or upload something. So they took them away. FBI was investigating them, and it took us like 6 months to get them all back. that was a little scary. I was also wondering, am I going to lose all of my teaching files that I've ever created? That would have been pretty rough too. But anyway, Homeland Security is our most recent. It was created by George W. Bush after the 9/11 attacks, so that one is pretty new. Now, when we look at this list of succession, never are all 19 people in the same place at one time, because of the fact that if there were some sort of catastrophe, we want to make sure we have somebody designated to be our survivor, to be the president, hence the show that I have referenced and some of you are familiar with. And so when it comes to the big meetings, they will have them in separate locations. They'll have small cabinet meetings where they'll just meet with a few people at a time. Or when it is the State of the Union address, they will take away one person, they'll hide him away. Many times that person does not know until the day of that he is not going to be at the president's speech that day. The Secret Service will come, approach him, and they'll say, cancel your plans tonight, you're going with us. And they'll whisk him away, and they'll put him in a secure location somewhere. When we get to the State of the Union, it's always kind of a fun game to try to figure out who's missing. And so you go through the cabinet members, and typically the camera will be panning the audience, trying to pick out certain people. And eventually they'll come to the conclusion of, oh, Betsy DeVos is not here. She must be the one person that is hiding away. So we don't know exactly where, but we know it's in a secure location. So